How's it going, Rogues Gallery? Today we're going to tell you the real reason why you should be playing Shadowverse Evolve. And it's not because of the excellent gameplay, the really cool first-party companion app that makes gameplay really smooth and adds a little bit of flavor.
Impossible!
Or the beautiful chase cards in the game. Here are some of the awesome-looking leaders and some of the alternate art ultimate rares, because those things are true. No, we're going to talk about what it really boils down to for a lot of folks these days, and that is the cost to play. Shadowverse Evolve is one of the consistently most affordable trading card games to play currently on the market. We're going to break down a couple of the top decks right now to kind of help illustrate that, so you just don't have to take my word for it. We're going to go over and showcase some actual decks. And this is coming from someone who I literally build like 6 to 11 decks every single new set. I have videos going over all those. I'll throw one in the description down below, the latest video. We have 11 decks along with deck lists and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, this is something I'm very much aware of because I literally build decks every single set. And before we get started, I do want to give one little caveat here. All of the information that I'm going to be using is information that I gathered today at the time of this recording on TCG Player through TCG Player Low. I tried to make my carts like I would if I were personally buying the cards as singles, and so I tried to optimize it a little bit. I paid a little bit extra to have, you know, less shipments. I don't like having like 9, 10 plus shipments. I like to have as minimal shipments as possible, so I'm willing to pay a couple extra dollars to, you know, minimize that a little bit. And also, this is from TCG Player. This is not from, you know, a European or Southeast Asian seller, so keep that in mind as well. Your mileage is going to be varied if you're living in Europe or Southeast Asia, as well as your availability. With all that said, let's go with the first deck. And this one is currently, and this is true for all three of them, currently one of the best decks in the entire game right now. This is Natura Forest Craft. And this deck comes in at $98 with shipping. So let's just say it's about $100 or so for one of the best decks in the game right now. Now, I wanted to do this deck in particular as the first one that we talk about because I feel that this deck is more indicative of the average price of a Shadowverse Evolve deck. The other two that we're going to talk about are on the very top end, whereas this one is kind of on the more average or lower end. We'll talk about the overall price range when talking about this, but I think about $100 is what I think about when I'm like, okay, I'm going to be building a Shadowverse Evolve deck. If I need to buy singles, which I usually just buy cases and open up the cases, but if you're going to buy singles, this is kind of what you should be looking at, unless your deck has an expensive outlier in it, which the next two decks do have, and we'll see the absolute top end of Shadowverse Evolve. As mentioned before, we are going to have deck lists in the description down below for every deck that we talk about today. And speaking of which, let's move on to our second deck, which is Natura Sword Craft. So in a lot of folks' minds right now, Natura Sword Craft is the deck to beat. This is the best deck in the entire game, with a little, you can argue it a little bit here and there, but this is the deck that won the most recent Grand Showdown in Singapore. It had a huge showing at the event, a really commanding performance. And so I would consider this to be your very top end. This is like your S tier deck. This is the one that everyone's going to be thinking about beating if you're playing in this current format. And as you can see here, the deck is priced at about $220. And that, like I said, is the very top end. And before we break down why that exactly is for this particular deck, I do want to mention that this really feels like the range to me, about $100 to $200. This is the range for your top tier competitive decks for Shadowverse Evolve. And the reason why this deck in particular is $200 is one card and its Evolved version, Viridia Magna. At the time of this recording, Viridia Magna is $25 each, and you run 3 of them, and the Evo version is $15 each, and you run 3 of them. So that is $120 with just this one card and its Evo card. So if you subtract that from the total value, the $220, we're back at that $100 price point, which is kind of like I like to say, the $100 is about where you want to look at for Shadowverse Evolve. And this deck is one of the decks that you don't have to run Viridian Magna. I've actually seen other versions of Natura Sword that cut out Viridian Magna altogether, and they go for more of a storm package with like Machina, right? And so if you wanted to do a build that is more focused on Machina, you could build this deck at a much, much cheaper price. Though you could also mix the two and kind of do like a hybrid if you would like to. But my point here is that $220 is the top end, and at least for this version of the deck, it runs the Viridian Magnas, but you have some options here. You don't necessarily have to run them. You can cut that cost in half and still have a very, very strong and competent deck. And now, that's not entirely true for the next deck that I want to talk about, and this is the other deck that a lot of folks think about when they think of the top decks in Shadowverse Evolve right now. This is another deck that had a pretty big presence at the Grand Showdown in Singapore. This, of course, is one of my favorite decks, Machina Abyss, and this one also clocks in at about $220. Now, while Viridian Magna was the big outlier card in the Natura Sword deck, here we have Techno Lord, which is another big outlier expensive card that you run 3 of in your deck. At the time of this recording, Techno Lord is $28 each, so about $84 on to this deck's price with just that single card. Now, unlike Natura Sword, I feel that Techno Lord is a little bit more integral to this deck, and I likely wouldn't swap it out for anything else if I couldn't help it. But I will say that this deck in particular, the Machina Abysscraft deck, is a deck that we know is still competitive viable going into the next meta because we have data from the Japanese tournament scene, which is several sets ahead. So we can kind of like look at that and see what performed well in the Japanese meta. So we have an idea of what might perform well here in, you know, the North American, the US, the English meta. And yes, the Machina Abysscraft deck still did very, very well. It's a very explosive, aggressive deck, and so you can be rest assured that if you kind of build this deck, even though it's on the high end of things, you're going to have a deck that's at least competitive into the next meta, and it, you know, barely changed at all, if any, so you can basically rock in with the deck that you have now. Apologies for the weird edit, I'm recording this bit on a different day. In addition to Shadowverse Evolve being incredibly affordable and consumer friendly, it's also just really, really easy to pick up and play. If you're familiar with card games, I feel that it's incredibly intuitive, and even if you're not, it's just really, really easy to learn, especially with the aid of that companion app that I showed off at the beginning of the video. Impossible! There are 6 distinct classes for you to choose from, with a lot of different archetypes within each class. There's valuable alternate art cards if you wanted to go that route and kind of like trick your deck out. If you wanted to go very extra, try to get all the fancy stuff as possible. I do that from time to time when I find a deck that I really, really love. Abysscraft. Some of them are even promo cards that you can earn through their organized play circuit that just look so good. And if that wasn't enough, there are also a bunch of different ways to play the game. There's kind of like your regular constructed 1v1, but there's also Glory Finder, which had an official like product release. I actually rated it as one of my top products of 2024. I think there's incredible value in there. 4 decks. You can just buy the product and just jam games with your friends. It's incredibly, incredibly fun. But there's also limited formats like Open 8 and Sealed. Not to mention a new way to try a physical card game if you are familiar with the digital Shadowverse. And I have to mention now Shadowverse Worlds Beyond, which will be launching later this year. I am personally incredibly excited for Shadowverse Worlds Beyond. I am 1,000,000% making content about this game. I just don't know if I'm going to be making content here on Red Zone Rogue, or if I should make a second YouTube channel where it's just Worlds Beyond. I don't know. Let me know what you think about that. Should I keep the Shadowverse content all on Red Zone Rogue, or should I do the digital content on a separate channel? I feel like that might be the best option, but I digress. There's even going to be some new starter decks that have a tie-in with Shadowverse Worlds Beyond, which is absolutely brilliant. They're going to be coming out later this year. We don't know a ton of details about these decks, but they seem like an incredibly good starting point where you get a deck and you get some like cards to upgrade the deck, and you get some booster packs, and you get a leader card that's a new Worlds Beyond leader, and some other stuff that we don't know about yet. There's just some really, really cool stuff in the pipelines. There's so many ways to enjoy Shadowverse Evolve, and I feel that it is one of the most consumer-friendly and affordable games on the market. It's really, really easy to get into, and that's kind of like the big takeaway that I want to share with you all in this video. And that's going to do it for today's video. Thank you all so much for watching. I really appreciate it. Don't forget to do the things like, comment, and subscribe if you found this video useful. And see you next time.